Good morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 17 of That Moment Heart to Heart Talk. And today I have Neal Conlon with me. I'm so excited to have you here, Neal. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. This is now take two because I had a cyber security breach and wasn't connected to Facebook. And I know that you were going to help me with that later on. So thank you. I'm really glad that we're finally on here today. And I'm really excited to just share you with the audience and everyone around. I recently met you, and I'd love you to share actually who you are in the world and how you contribute.
Ooh, that's a very good loaded question. So
Yeah, not a
who,
time to be humble. So
right?
definitely share it all.
Who is Neal Conlon? I'm a New York City native. I grew up in New York. Um, had kind of a turbulent, crazy childhood, like many of us do. Uh, didn't have good frameworks and good examples in my life of what a traditional family, I guess, would be like. Um, got kicked out of a bunch of schools, did a bunch of crazy things. Happy to answer questions about those type of things, and then joined the Marine Corps uh, because I wanted to kind of escape from that situation. And so I served a bunch of years in the United States Marine Corps, travel all over the world, both pre 9/11 and post 9/11 service. Um, and came out of the military, struggled with my identity, having to kind of take the pack off your back, but traded the pack in for a suit and tie. Had some really interesting people take me underneath their wings and did a bunch of very interesting corporate stuff, all with no major college degree, just kind of this idea that my grandparents instilled with me is that anything you put your mind to it, you can do it. Um,
Mm,
and they overcompensated for my parents when I was young, and it just kind of imprinted in me in a meaningful way. And to this day, um, I think I can do anything I apply myself to. Um, I've then leaped into the startup space and became a startup entrepreneur and startup founder, and raised a bunch of investment capital and built big companies, and most recently raised $100 million in investment capital, built a big company. Big company got acquired right before COVID. Um, in the background of that, I kept on trying to get my shit together,
mm,
and I kept on building up wealth and building on a relationship and trying to build all these things together, and it kept on trying to do it, and it just kept on falling apart in my hands. And well, that's how it felt. And I remember about 6 years ago, I was married at the time. Um, had was making great money, traveled all over the world, had children, 5,000 square foot home, um, sitting on top of uh, the presidential suite at the Lowe's Hotel in South Beach, having an expensive bottle of scotch by my side, by myself, overlooking the ocean, and just being miserable. And really taking stock for a moment and being like, what could I possibly want here? I've got an endless Amex card. I've got, all the things. Why do I feel miserable? And it kind of led me to a series of micro uh, breakdowns. Um, and I really took steps to start to do a bunch of personal development work, as I know you do as well. And I started going to a bunch of personal development things, and it started kind of for me, and it's different for everybody. It started to be quick injections of motivation or quick injections of, all right, it was like breadcrumbs that would lead me to the place to the next piece of it. But
mm,
it never felt like I was grasping or it was taking me far enough, right?
mm-hmm,
And it's almost like the hero's journey,
mm-hmm,
right? And along the way to the big, scary dragon, there's other challenges along the way. and ultimately just sent me deeper and deeper. And over time, I sought mentorship and counsel and started going to men's events and masculinity events. And I started working with anthropologists and clinical psychologists. And because I'm just this infinite researcher, I started to really pay attention. And the thing that really came to me after doing a whole bunch of personal development work and years of events, and when I started to listen to men,
Mm-hmm.
I started to hear them differently.
Mm.
And so we're going to talk a lot more about that specifically, but it led me to this point now where, I have a serial entrepreneur. I have several different businesses. My passion is really around business coaching, and hosting these men's retreats and this men's program that I have, where there's a huge need in the world right now, and I can give specific examples of where men really need to seek counsel and need a system or a support system in place to empower them to have the right checks and balances in place in order for them to thrive, instead of retreating to places where we have been as a society for a bunch of years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's me.
I love it. First of all, the way I reached out to you is because I saw you on one of the personal development platforms that we just happened to be both part of, the Tony Robbins community. And one of the things that attracted me most to actually reaching out and speaking with you was your focus and the way that you focus on men. And we've talked about this personally on one of our first calls, but when you say that, men need it most now and what's happening for men in society, and I'll say as a therapist working with kids for over 15 years now, boys too, just in terms of how boys are being raised and what's going on in society around men. What's going on there in your mind? Like, how would you describe that? What's happening energetically? And just when you say they need to be empowered, what's happening that's so disempowering?
Great question. And so I'll give a disclaimer first, right? So I will probably make some unfiltered, very congruent statements during this conversation, this part of the conversation especially, but it comes from a place of I want to help, and it comes from a place of just in 2020 alone. I mean, I've spoken to thousands of men one on one. I spend my entire day is on the phone talking to men about the things they're going through, right? And so I have this like research mind that is curating the data points constantly. And so the biggest challenge that's going on right now for men, well, there's two big ones. The first one leads to the second one. The first one is that if you think about it, I'm 42, and so as the women's empowerment movement has been scaling since 1950, right? The blueprint of where the man fits in the relationship has been changing,
Mm-hmm.
and the number of absentee fathers, the numbers of divorces, the number of those kind of scenarios is growing like 10 or 20% per year.
Mm-hmm.
And when the masculine, right, the masculine role, right, if we talk about masculine and feminine polarity, the yin and the yang, when the masculine is not able to show up,
Mm-hmm.
it is natural for the feminine to assume elements of the masculine energy because the two need each other. And
Mm-hmm.
what that means is and I'm going to make some statements, but I'm a huge supporter of women's empowerment. I have daughters. I support it all. But we're in this like ugly transformation stage where, with so many fathers not showing up, or so many husbands or boyfriends or partners disappearing in the relationship abruptly and not doing it in a meaningful way, uh, we have women who step into that masculine and feminine role.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have children, if you have young boys, and this has been going on since the 70s, let's just say a young boy, most of his time is spent with his mom.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes to school, and then 80 something percent of all teachers in schools are female.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time the boy gets into his teens, unless somebody was driving him into more masculine influence, or into his 20s even, when he starts dating women and people start asking him to man up or be more manly,
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't have like what he doesn't even know what that means, because he doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
a framework or a template to that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now, can I interject and just ask something? Because, for people who know a lot about, feminine, masculine energy, or what you mean, the distinction between man up and masculine energy, right? The You're not, what is masculine energy? When somebody says man up, boys or men, young men, they see it a certain way from what we see in the media. I mean, it's not the kind of masculine energy that you're necessarily talking about.
right. So taking a step back, right, there's this concept of masculine and feminine energy. And it's nothing to do with the organs that are between your legs, just to be clear, right? It's nothing tied to your preference. It is just this that there's many ways and many religions and many types of holistic views about this idea of a masculine and a feminine energy that resides in each of us. And
Mm-hmm.
the masculine energy is meant to be practical and pragmatic
Mm-hmm.
and decisive
Yeah.
and create safety and security and hold space,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the feminine is meant to be nurturing and emotional and erratic and disorganized and confused sometimes and soft and hard and back and forth, right? And so if you look at it from that standpoint, the way I always like to explain it in my men's groups is like the masculine energy is meant to be the cliff, the shore, right? The rocks, right? We are meant to be firm. And the feminine energy is meant to be the ocean, right? The perfect storm. And so that there's this constant thing that is in every culture I've researched, in every organization I've worked with, whether there, it starts with I'm confused because the thing turns you around, but like the cliff, right? The masculine, the rock, is supposed to be like this all the time,
Mm.
and the feminine is meant to be this storm that is constantly going against the cliff, and when the two meet in the right way, it is alignment, right? Because without the cliff, the wave doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right? Because one needs the other to exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
without the wave, the cliff is nothing, right? Because
Yeah.
it almost needs, those things need to happen in order for us to be balanced. And when we're in this stage where that is slightly confused now, and when the cliff is being taken away, when the masculine is being taken away because the cliff was not taught how to be a cliff or taught how to be firm, the storm gets more erratic. The storm feels unsure. Then eventually the water goes, well, I guess we're just going to be our own cliff,
Yeah.
right? So that's the first piece of that, really is tied to the fact of, with a lot of absentee fathers and a lot of good examples of strong men I'm not saying there's not a lot of strong men running around. I'm saying that during those periods of evolution of young men, we've lost a lot of our way with being able to show up as adults because we don't have the framework, the template, or the imprint.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece of it is, and we're seeing this evolve very, very much over the past week and a half, is, and I say this as a white man who has multi-ethnic daughters, just to be clear. I, in my life, have never It's like that game, right? Have I ever, never, whatever it's called.
Never have I ever. Yeah.
Right. Never have I ever felt like I was getting paid less for my gender.
Mm.
Never have I ever walked out of a bar or at some other scene and had a woman follow me down the street whistling or trying to take me home with her. Maybe I should work on that. But never have I ever, been pulled over and been concerned about putting my hands on the wheel of a car and potentially getting shot or taken to jail again, like for some silly reason, right?
Mm.
And there's 30 other reasons of those that I've mapped out. I don't know what that's like, which
Yeah.
means while you can look at that as like, well, that's all, minority people, women, whatever. But what happens is that all of those women who have persevered through those things, all of those men of color or anybody who's been through those has built a muscle and knows what it's like to feel uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
and knows what it's like to grow and evolve past that.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the statistics, we live in a culture where the people who are pissed off, the people who are running around doing all this crazy stuff, like even like what happened in the Capitol building recently, it's all people who don't have any muscle for uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And so when those two things connect, right, that brings us to where we are, where we don't have a good example of security and safety, and that cliff is not firm right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have such uncertainty. That's where I think the two biggest challenges are for our culture and society right now.
And why is this so important to you? Why have you taken this up as something that is important for you to, trailblaze through?
One, because I have seen personally the effects of what happens when you create a support system and have the right counsel, right?
Mm-hmm.
The crazy thing is, and I was speaking about this in one of my men's groups last night, is like if you get a group of men together and they are like-minded,
Mm-hmm.
and you can honor the 4 agreements and you can just spend time together, the worst thing that'll happen is that you'll learn more awareness and perspective. It's the worst thing that could happen.
That's the worst?
That's the worst.
That would be the best.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You can go to an event and feel like you can go to a bar and feel like it wasn't worth the cost of drinks. You go to a restaurant and get bad food. You can go on a date and feel like you didn't connect with the person. There's all these things that people do every single day. You go to a movie, when we can go to movies, and be like the movie wasn't worth it. The
Mm-hmm.
worst that'll happen is that you'll get more awareness and more perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The best that'll happen is that you'll build community with men who will support you and will empower you to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And and there's this thing that goes on, like I'm sure you probably experience it. Like the hard part is that the feminine is built for community, right? So that's why women can build community. Women can, like, all these things about, like, women can go to the bathroom together and have a conversation, right? Women can get together into a book club. Women, because there's a natural need to build the tribe and the community.
Mm-hmm.
And men, we're not wired, because we don't have that template in place or that framework in place on how to ask for help or how to build support.
Mm-hmm.
And so tying that all in, what I realized was I went through a bunch of turbulent relationships. I had a really bad case of savior syndrome for a long time. I thought I could save everybody. And after doing all this work, I started to realize that as I'm doing all this work, my daughter, who's 9 now, is growing past this little alien phase. And I'm this single dad who is overcompensating for things like parents do sometimes.
Yeah.
And I caught myself and I said, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and operate as the man that I want my daughter to be attracted to when she gets older.
Mm.
And I'm hoping that if I'm saying that the thing that's missing from society is men showing up in the lives of their children, then I have a responsibility to show up in this little girl's life and break the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have adopted this mantra of like, and it's very weird for men, I think, to go down this path, is make sure that she's seen and heard and understood all the time, and make her feel safe and secure all the time. And that way, like, she can be her, she can be erratic and be emotional and be all the things, but the minute that she needs me and asks, right, permission, I take one step in and say, what do you need? And the minute that she doesn't need me anymore, I just back up and let her thrive, right? It's that cliff and the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
right? That the cliff is just there. Whenever the ocean needs to bang against it, it's there, and it's a
Yeah.
rock, and it's not going to go anywhere. And when I started to do that, I started to see how much our relationship thrives. And
Wow.
then I started to use that practice with other women in my life, my mom, my cousins, whoever it was. I started to see how it actually changed the energy and changed the relationship that I have with these people.
Wow.
And then when I started to take it to men, you start to realize like how much we just all, I can take that conversation to a man, and I can do a diagnostic now and recognize how much he's leaning in on the feminine in his life, because if that feels really good to him, he's in there. Like if the water, if I'm talking to the water and the water reacts and the cliff is not, you now know which direction you need to go in.
Mm. Got it. So if you're talking to a man and you're presenting this, right? And I was actually, let me actually back up and just give a clear example of something I was just reading in David Data's book. My partner was just reading The Superior Man, which, oh, so good. And I'm reading It's a Guy Thing, which is such a great book for women. And I was telling you before this segment that I wish I had it sooner in my life. Not so much because it's such a manual, but it answers all the questions that we have in our minds. But one of the things that Data was saying was, so he was speaking to women in the book, and he says, well, what kind of man do you seek for yourself? Do you want someone who, and this is less about, attraction sexually, and more about like the energy that you're talking about in terms of security and safety that, the feminine really, really craves from the masculine, is, do you want that, if you're erratic and moody and you shut the door and I don't want to talk, do you want someone who says, all right, I'll leave you alone to do your thing? Or do you want someone who asks permission, walks through the door, holds you, says you're loved, and I'm going to keep holding you until you feel you're loved, regardless of whether you're, flailing and moody. And he pontificate, he'll say, you probably want the latter, because like you said, we, the feminine, pushes, right? Like, and is kind of erratic, and the masculine is there to just assure and really provide that safety and security. And I wonder, when you take that to men, what do you think of what I just said? And then when you take that to men, what do you find is the reaction, or is it something that is just natural? Oh yeah, that's true or right? Or do you find that most don't know what you're talking about at first?
Well, I think it depends on where you are in the conversation with yourself.
Ah.
Right. And like one of the things I think is fantastic. So I belong to David Data's and John Wineland's mastermind group. And so we meet once a week, and we do this type of work and answer these type of questions all the time. And the thing that comes up for me there is, we live in this time where there's so much media and so much information available that I think one of the struggles in the relationships is uh, we come together with people and then we expect them to say have the same definitions of what we have. And one of the
Mm,
things that I subscribe to is many of these words, love, trust, integrity, leadership, sexy, um, all the words that are tied into relationships, uh, really trauma, fear, insecurity, anxiousness, um, have three layers to them, right? Like integrity is a really good one, right? Like you and I come from very different walks of life, and if we were having an argument about who has better or who has the right integrity, we might, if we, unless we define that together, we may be arguing about something that neither of us really think is true, but we still
mm,
argue about it because we're triggered by that. And what, so a good practical example, the first level of integrity, first layer of integrity is the integrity I have outward, right? The integrity I have in my word to people. The second level of layer of integrity is the layer of integrity I have with myself.
mhm,
Like, did I do the thing I said I was going to do that I told myself, right? The inner, the mind, right? The voice inside of us. And then there's the layer of integrity that we have with whatever divine version you believe in.
mhm,
And so I oftentimes have to break that down to men, because what happens is even men who operate with a very high integrity out in the world, I said I was going to do it, so therefore I'm going to do it. I show up on time to every meeting, right? But then there's like the conflict of the internal integrity where I said I was going to do something, but I didn't mean it, but I needed to say it because she needed to hear that or he needed to hear that. And then I ran and did something else.
uh,
But that doesn't mean that you don't have integrity outward. It just means that
mhm,
that there's a conflict in there that needs to be resolved.
mm,
And then there's the integrity with like connecting those two together where, congruence for men is a very important thing. And what I've realized from my own work is if you're operating through all three of those, right? Like, and it works for all those words. I think so. The biggest thing is when I talk to men, what I often find is there are men in different stages of that. There are men who are missing or are aware that something is missing but not sure what it is.
mhm,
Then there are men who know they're making mistakes and they're not operating at the place that they really want to, but
mhm,
don't know how to get there.
mhm,
And then there are men who are probably a little bit older in life, 45 and older usually, who feel like they are missed out on opportunities to correct it and are seeking ways to come to terms and let go of a lot of the things that they may have done or not let go of in the past.
mhm. Got it. This just brings to light how, I don't want to say complicated, but complex and layered this is. And you just really highlighted something that I think comes up for a lot of people, which is integrity. For example, if we use integrity as multi-layered, it's not just doing what you say you're going to do, but then the integrity within the self, which, I mean, it really was like an aha moment when you said it for me. And what Going back to you for just a moment, I know that you shared a little bit about your past and where you come from. And what would you say, and it sounds like the support system was incredible for you, but what would you say were some factors that really helped you in your struggle? Because you didn't just come from where you came from and then suffered through it. It sounds to me like you really honed that art of struggling through and creating meaning around what's happened in your life. And I just wonder, what was that process like for you, or what's there for you about that?
Oh, it was painful and brutal. I was married once, then divorced, and my mom was married three times, and my dad married three times, and I got into my next relationship and got about 5 years in, and I said to myself, I just, at some point, the cycle is just gonna, keeps on going, right? And at some point, for all of us, right? Whether it's drinking, whether it's drugs, whether it's sex, whether it's money, whether anything, at some point you have to do a retrospective and be like, why does the first thing is blame, right? Why does this keep happening to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think I give some of the credit to my military background to really kind of take stake and to do retrospective and to be able to be like, all right, where are we in this mission? What's the plan? Why do we keep on failing at the mission? And how do we adjust? And it was really painful for me because I come from a family of with a lot of stuff, like a lot of people do, and I really, the short version is, for 2 years, I did every single Reiki, every single shamanic sweat lodge. I went to Buddhist temples. I went to Hindu temples in India. Like, I was like flying all over the world while I was building all these amazing things and then spending a couple of days in these places. And the quick answer is, I found no answers. Nothing that would stick.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, for people who have alcohol or drug problems, like they talk about going to rock bottom and not being able to find the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And people either go in one direction or the other. And I went to rock bottom on personal development. And I'm like, I still can't find it. And it really took me a hard conversation with myself to go inward and say, what's the worst that could happen if I just focus on seeking counsel from men?
Mm.
And there is something to it to be like, and then I started to, do a lot of this men's work and started to really research on like the things that are missing and the things that are lacking. And then realizing like, it's nobody else's fault. It's like, like my story before I did all this work, I used to tell people, like, even with the successes I had, I'd be like, I used to tell myself, the only reason why I'm not making tens or hundreds of millions of dollars is because my dad was a prick,
Mm.
and he left my mom when he was 5, and he went to prison, and this and that. I submit, and now, like, even though I don't have a great relationship with my father, like, I love the fact that he did that.
Mm.
Like, my mom had me when she was 16. My grandfather showed up at my other grandfather's door and said, when are you marrying my daughter? And, the first time I used my mom's cocaine, I was 11. And I got kicked out of 4 schools. I got pistol whipped as a kid. And they were all such gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think about, just to dig into this for a second, because it's coming up for me. Like, I've had Black people, as we go through this very challenging time for Black Americans, in my face telling me that I have no idea what it's like to be accosted by the cops or be judged by the police or all these other things.
Mm.
And I look them right back in the face and I'm like, you see this scar right here? This is when a cop took his 9mm and bashed my face in when I was 14 for no reason other than I ran away when I was spray painting graffiti. And then they go, oh, my bad. I'm sorry. You really do understand it. And it's such a gift. The crazy thing is that people seem to wrap around trauma like it is such a gift because we're going through so much change and so much challenge, that the ability to understand what other people are going through, and for me it's the ability to understand what other men are going through as all this stuff is changing, is such a powerful thing that comes from the fact of I've experienced more things than you have. And not to say that's a bad thing or a good thing, I just have. And I want to share that with men. And I want to say, hey, the thing you're looking for, the thing you keep on trying to reproduce, it isn't there. Like, you're just digging in the wrong spot. You just got to dig over here a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I love what you just shared. In the world of post-traumatic growth, which is my area of deep expertise and love, what you call yourself is an expert companion. It's like you're able to, without pushing, understand where someone is in their journey and really guide them and almost see the possibility for them without them having to see it yet for themselves, and just know and hold space for what's possible. I think that's awesome. I think that's amazing. And in terms of the how and why men show up or don't, is there a quick answer for that?
Um, the, I mean, I think it goes back to the stages, right? When what I've experienced is that when men are operating from the feminine, right, they want to be seen, heard, and understood. They need to be heard. Like so really that's really what happens is a lot of men will come to me and say, I just need someone to listen to me. I need to be heard. And I go there and we start there.
Yeah.
And I can hear that. But now it's like, all right, is that where do you want to go? Right? It's like the example I've heard recently that I really like is like, we keep on getting into a car. You got the keys, but you don't know where you got to go. There's no map, there's no destination. So where do you go? You don't. You get out, you get in the next car, you get in the next car. And we do it in our relationships, we do it with finances. Without a model, men will constantly try to reproduce a model that they can follow. And I always say it's like the best thing I will say on this whole podcast is like, it is like the ideal scenario is that we get a box full of Legos and it comes with the instructions on how to make a school bus. And we can follow the little steps and put together a school bus and be happy that we put the school bus together. And for a lot of us, we go through these periods of our lives where the box showed up with no directions, no picture. We don't know, and we keep on building something. And just when we think we got it, we're missing pieces. It wasn't the thing. And we're like, all right, let's try again. And we keep on doing it over and over again. And the other thing that's worth mentioning there is the hardest part is while the ocean is changing, right? And the ocean, right, the feminine, when a woman can be in her 30s and 40s and be beautiful, smart as fuck, make her own money, have her own house, potentially have children and take care of them, and multitask all those things, and I don't have a framework or a blueprint to follow, where does the man fit into that? Where does the man feel like he fits into that conversation? Because head of household is a different conversation. Money provider is now half money maker, half provider. And so without those things, the cliff is wondering why the cliff exists. And this is why you have shootings in schools are always boys, right? This is why you have veterans in crisis who with PTSD. Now women have it too, but men are the ones that kill themselves, right? This is why you have so much masculine suicide. It's not for any other reason other than guys are going, I don't know where I fit.
This is what you're talking. First of all, you described me and a lot of my friends, and it's a personal conversation in my head as you're talking, and I appreciate it so much. And I'll just be really transparent because so many of us, especially I want to say in this Western society, right? We live in a very masculine dominated space, and especially being in New York, it's just a very masculine energy city, and we're constantly, I love your shirt, pressing forward, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that in a bit. We're constantly pressing forward, and in relationships, something that I've noticed a great deal, I always used to say, why is this person so intimidated, or why can't they just, and for lack of a better term, man up? Like, what's going on here, right? Isn't it my job to want to be heard? What's happening? And it's very confusing. And then what ends up happening is dissolution of relationships. And, for reasons of what? Not, nobody knows why, they just kind of fall apart. But what you're talking about is a bit of first of all, clarity for the, for people who aren't in the personal development space all the time and understanding this, but also your work really, I think, is a gift to women as well as men when you work with men, and also just relationships and families in general. I'm just thinking of so many of the families I work with that do have little boys and girls, and to grow up in a family where both energies are really harnessed and nurtured and loved and appreciated. I would have loved, I loved my childhood and I love my parents, but that would have been an incredible environment to grow up in.
Yeah, and a big piece of why I do what I do really is when I started to go down this path, I spoke at Google's conference on inclusion and diversity, and lots of Me Too, lots of LGBT folks and people of color. And here, the white military veteran with sleeve tattoos gets on stage and starts talking about a topic. And for lack of better words, I was shunned. And I got off that stage and I took stock in that. And I said, you know what? That's not my problem, right? That's not my shit. That's their shit. And that was a huge growth moment for me because I learned that I could then navigate through that conversation. But ultimately, what I've adopted is this idea of how I don't need to justify to the Me Too movement why I'm committed to your conversation of women's empowerment. But what I'm going to do, I don't need the credit for it. I don't want the credit for it. But what I want to do is have impact on it. And how do I have impact on it? You want to protect and save the women? You educate the men. Right? Because the reality is that regardless, right, we live in a society that is still dominated by decision makers and leadership that is predominantly men. And men who have to be able to adjust to society's movements in a way that is meaningful, right? We have a society where, with one of my coaching clients, I coach companies now, big companies, on adopting healthy masculinity in the workplace. Because for the first time ever, you have a 24-year-old smart woman who came out of Columbia, Wharton, Yale, Harvard, wherever, in a world where the CEO is 65 and at one point in his career could do martini lunches with the executive assistant. And the difference in ideals, values, behaviors, and belief systems there is massive.
Yeah.
Right? So, it's a big piece of it is really just being able to hold space for really what's going on. The other piece worth mentioning is, a lot of people like to throw these weird definitions over words. A big one that comes up for me a lot is this whole idea of toxic masculinity, right? And people who are very triggered by this idea that of toxic masculinity. Now, going back to what we started this conversation with, if the boy had no example of what a positive masculine presence is, how can we measure level of toxicity? Right? That's the first piece. The second piece is I really look at this in when something triggers me, when I see even on the internet, when I see something where someone's like, something political or something racial or something whatever, and we all get triggered. I always operate, I let it take stock and I look at it like this. What's the compassionate reaction to that? And so if somebody's on top of a building waving a crazy flag, and we get triggered by the colors of the flag, the person doing it, the type of person doing it, if we hold compassion for that and be like, what would it take for me to do that? What would it really take for me to be in a state where I had to grab the flag, run to the place and do the thing? And think about how triggered and how scared that person had to be. And that's just kind of the way they're letting it all out.
Got it. I love how you describe things. It's very, very visual and palatable if I can use that word. I want to know so badly, because I keep seeing it all over social media. What's this press forward thing?
So 4 or 5 years ago, I was running a company, and I wanted to go down the path of the company doing really well, making good money, and I really was felt drawn to building a brand. And I worked with some of the biggest brand agencies at the time, spent a boat ton of money, went through all these branding exercises.
Wait a
And
minute, Neal. Is this before or after you did the bobblehead and the Pez dispenser and
before,
oh, okay.
before, yes, clearly I like to build businesses. Um, but it was interesting because, so the reason I'm telling the story is, so when people struggle or are trying to figure out how you build a brand, the biggest one is you build your personal brand. And if you work with a big branding agency, and if anyone's interested in it, I can give access to the surveys and stuff like this. They put you through this big, huge, like 100-question survey. How would you do this? Why would you do this? What would you? All these questions, and you get done, and then they put you through this intensive interview where they actually review every question and be like, "Is this really how you feel it? Did you really want to pick C, or did you want to pick B, but you didn't feel comfortable?" Like, long story short, they take you through this whole big thing, and then you get an interview with the CEO of the company, and they put this 4-page document in front of you. And I was reading the document, and the craziest thing is like, I was like, that's me, that's me, that's me. And on the last page, they were like, your brand is press forward.
Ooh.
And it's like the whole, like every little thing that when you go through these exercises, it all just kind of clicks and makes sense to the whole thing. And then I put the whole thing on the back burner because I was building other businesses and companies, and I didn't recognize the value of it. And in 2020, I felt drawn to resurface the brand because it really is a brand that's built for all of us now, right? That's my tagline is press forward, a brand for all of us now. And currently I have hoodies, hats, notebooks, and some other swag items. And we sell a lot of them. And every single time that somebody buys a hoodie or hat, I make a donation to Veterans in Transition, Men in Crisis, and men's mental health awareness charities.
I love that. That's incredible. And by the way, press forward, I mean, it's just so in line with just growing through struggle. And it's a testament to perhaps you weren't ready then, but you're ready now. And it's incredible.
Thank you.
Wait to buy my stuff. So I know that you have I just happen to know that you have a retreat coming up February 19th, right? The weekend after Valentine's Day for men in your home in Cold Spring. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Thank you for bringing that up. I figured after the men have a weekend of love with their loved ones, they should have a weekend of masculinity to kind of reset and balance the wheels out. So yeah, it's February 19th, 20th, and 21st. It's at my private residence in Cold Spring, New York, which is a 7-acre amazing place. We will come together as a group of 15 men. We have a few spots left, I believe. We will spend the weekend together. It'll be all outdoors. There will be COVID precautions all in place. And we will have facilitators, and we will seek counsel, do the men's work. And what I always say to everybody when they say, well, what actually happens at these things? What do you just like chant and like, throw spears at each other? But the reality is that what I've found is that every time a man has brought me his challenge, his trauma, his whatever it is, I tell them that all they need to do is experience a hero's journey. And what that means is you need to get the call for adventure. You need to gather a group of like-minded men. You need to go on quests and then head to a big, scary monster, conquer that monster, and then go home and have the spoils of war laid before you. And as crazy as that sounds, It seems to work for Netflix, and it seems to work for the men that we work with.
I love that so much. And I'm just very personally, as you're talking, I'm getting chills. And whenever that happens, it just means it resonates for me. And I wanted to share that because, like I said, I think that whenever, women are supported, whenever men are supported, it helps society, it helps the family, it helps the relationship, it helps the individual. And just reading in David Data's book, how important it is for women. And I certainly feel this when I'm with my women friends. We can just let our hair down and just enjoy and gab and eat and talk and be nuts and laugh and be silly. And the same is important for men, to really harness their masculinity and be around like-minded, more evolved and conscious beings. And I love it so much. So if anyone out there is seeking that kind of experience or knows a man who would be just even a little interested, I would say just go, and then Neal will take care of the rest.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. I love it. Is there going to be any gifts for the women in the men's lives in the swag bag?
I think the gift is how your man returns back to the home.
But I'm really interested in the sweatshirt, Neal. I'm really interested in the sweatshirt. Could there be a sweatshirt and a medium for women in that bag for David?
Well, I'm sure we can figure something out.
Awesome. And Neal, before we end for today, I wonder, is there anything that you'd like to say as far as a mantra or a quote or anything that you want to leave people with for today from our conversation?
That's a really good question. The mantra, I think, really becomes since we're going through this turbulent time, whenever someone is triggered by a behavior, always ask yourself, what's the compassionate response?
I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. I loved you being on here today. Thank you so much for sharing your space. I see your beautiful space and just your energy. It was invaluable. And we'll talk again soon.
Great. Well, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.